In session 3, we're going to cover different aspects of Peter Fuda's model of transformational leadership. And we're also going to have a chance to look at the fire matrix, which is one of the metaphors he uses. The fire matrix is very useful for us when we're starting to look at what are the different drivers and motivators in organisational change. We'll have a chance also to look at Heifetz's adaptive leadership model and Ralph Stacey's work on organisational leadership and dynamics. So you'll see this session actually has much more of a focus on organisational change at a bigger level rather than just on an individual and how individuals are affected. So these 3 different models are looking at aspects of leadership and also ways of leading change. Leadership effectiveness is not a matter of intention, it's a matter of impact. So if you think about that and you think about your own impact in organisations as a leader, what sorts of plans do you put in place for yourself to have an impact? What sorts of frameworks and models do you use that work for you? And do others understand what they are? If you want to have a look at some of the latest work on leadership and I suppose it's leadership around transforming organisations, then Dr. Peter Fuda's work is very useful. In his research, he developed 7 metaphors for leadership transformation. The first metaphor, fire, this is the motivational forces that initiate and sustain any transformation efforts in organisations. It includes looking at what is the platform for which things are moving from, what's our personal and organisational ambition, as well as having a look at our individual and organisational reasons for change. The next metaphor, the snowball, is really about accountability. And he's suggesting that if we have a snowball of accountability, it propels change efforts forward. It starts with the leader and builds momentum with others that are swept up in the journey. When leaders model accountability and are open about their own flaws and how they plan to work with them, it does model a different way for the people that they are leading. Now the next metaphor that's part of his model is around the master chef. So the master chef has the artful application of leadership science. A lot of the times what happens is people pick up what they might call a recipe for organisational change and they'll apply it regardless of what's happening. So you will know from your own experience that any time you've been involved in that where somebody's almost got a template for this is how it's going to be done, then you know that many forces will impact on that and it needs to be shifted and changed. So you as a leader, like you would work with your staff, you don't use exactly the same manner and the same attitude with every person. The same thing occurs at a broader level in an organisation. You have to be able to have a number of tools at your disposal, a number of different ways of working with people, a number of different change approaches, and get them to blend and respond to the environment and the new directions that you're trying to work with. Being a coach is also another key aspect of transformational leadership. You could call upon external coaches, key stakeholders, internal staff, have different people taking on that role of coach for you and others. And that means that you may not even say to them, I want you to be my coach. What you may say is, I'd really like to get your opinion on this at times. I'd really like you to question and challenge my thinking. These are all aspects of being a really effective coach. If you establish those relationships, this means that when you're leading change, you will have far more capacity to do it because you have those different people around you. Now, another one of the metaphors that Dr. Fuda refers to is the mask. Now, this is an interesting one because it does refer back to some of the work that we've been doing on the brain in earlier sessions, because the mask is our own defenses. It's our concealment of any of our imperfections. It probably might even be things where we go, well, I need to show a certain face here, but it may not be truly you. So he would be suggesting that we get to know what those defenses are. We get to know what faces we feel like we have to show, and see if we can do our best to shift to being far more authentic and in line with our own values. The more capacity we have to be authentic, the far better we are at inspiring others who are around us. The next metaphor is called the movie. And this is, much as we were just talking about, self-awareness and reflection, a leader who edits their own performance and directs a movie in line with their own vision of themselves. So this means that certainly the area of the mask and the movie, those two metaphors would be in line with what we've been working with around mindfulness, around emotional intelligence. This is around having a complementary set of journeys that interact with the leader's personal journey. So that means it would be fantastic to have other people on the same journey with you, and they might be going and doing different things and learning in different ways, but each one of you have made a decision to be on a leadership learning journey yourselves. So the interconnectedness of people builds a far more effective journey. So we're going to move into having a look at a particular one that is around the fire metaphor. So the fire matrix, you can see on this slide, really gets you to start to assess what is happening in the organisation and what is happening in the individuals. So quadrant 1 there says, what are the conditions and factors that prompted the change? And this is called the Organisational Burning Platform. You can see across the other side on the right, the Organisational Burning Ambition really refers to the vision and the purpose that we want to achieve organisationally. So if you start to work with your team and even start to analyse what are the conditions and factors that prompt the change, and what do we know of some of the vision? Now, some of you will be way down the track and you'll have the vision really clear. But for others of you, if you're starting to create the vision, then it's certainly going to be a discussion point. What's the purpose for the new direction? What do you want to achieve? Now, underneath that, the other two quadrants, quadrant 2 and 3. Quadrant 2 is the personal burning platform. So this is around personally, what are my concerns and fears around the change? And on the other side of it is, what is my ambition? What is my vision? And what is going to create meaning for me and others? So if you start to analyse those 4 quadrants, discuss with others what does this mean for them, then you have a much clearer picture of what's going on. You'll know that every time we undertake organisational change, you are trying to transform a human system, and human systems don't behave in the same way as, pulling a bike apart and putting it back together, because human systems respond to every individual in the organisation, every individual in the service, every ambition, every value, every motivation, every conflict, every way that individuals work and express the vision of the organisation. So if you can get to a stage where you can start having really good conversations around what are the burning platforms at an organisational level and what are the burning platforms at a personal level, when you even start to apply things like the framework that we looked at earlier on individual stages of change, you'll be identifying what people's fears and concerns are, and you'll be helping them move towards exploration and challenge by looking at their vision for the meaning that they want to create. We're going to move on and touch on the work of Heifetz now, because it gives us a different look at leadership, adaptive change, how we ourselves need to look at things from different angles. Now, in leadership and adaptive change, we would say there's a proportionate relationship between risk and adaptive change. The deeper the change and the greater the amount of new learning required, the more resistance there'll be, and therefore the greater danger to those who lead, and also the greater danger to those people who are experiencing the change. For this reason, we find that people then avoid dangers, either consciously or subconsciously, and they treat an adaptive change as if it was a technical one. So you would have seen this in many situations where the sorts of changes are huge, the sorts of new ways of working are beyond people's understanding and imagination about how it could be. But the structures that have been put in place to create that change are responses to a technical or structural change. So in adaptive change, you are looking at all sorts of different things. You have to look at the culture of the organisation. You have to start looking at where people are responding, where are the risks, gathering information about what's working and not working. The other thing that leaders have to do in adaptive change is they must step outside known patterns of behaviour, and they must put themselves at risk and become part of an emergent system. So leaders need to surrender personal control, tolerate uncertainty, work to develop a new culture at a collective level, and also encourage others and themselves to develop a new self at an individual level, and how this new self with a new identity works in the organisation. Adaptive leadership requires that we get on the balcony and get outside, look from outside the whole system, look from outside the team, look from outside the organisation, and think politically also about what's going on. But thinking politically within your organisation, this means that you have to engage people who might be opposing the direction that you're going on. Quite often, people are undecided. So when people are undecided, it's very good for you to start assessing, well, these people are keen to move, they've already started moving, and some of the things maybe they've come in from other organisations, they're bringing new ideas in, and then you might have people who are undecided because they're not sure how it's going to affect them personally, and then there may be some that are resisting. And if you're thinking politically, you are treating all of those different groups of people with respect and also recognition of where they're coming from. And your strategies for working with them will really bring people on board in a different way. You really need to also create a holding environment, and Heifetz calls this orchestrate the process. So the holding environment is a place where you can have productive dialogue, you can have conflict, you can have work happening, and you can also have people disagreeing and challenging each other's thinking. So this is a really useful thing to put in place. And many of us avoid the conflict, but if you have a good place for people to come together, to discuss, to debate, to challenge each other's thinking, this means you're creating that good environment. The other thing you have to do as a leader is manage your own hungers. This means that if you've got personal challenges where people are challenging you, and you have a need for more power or control or affirmation or importance or significance, and you are doing things because you want something from other people, this means that you won't be the most effective leader you can be. So many of us can fall into spots where we feel good about ourselves because we're getting a lot of affirmation from other people. We'll feel good about ourselves because we feel like we're in control. However, your job as a leader in a transformational environment and bringing people on board so that all can build their leadership and take on responsibility means that you might need to be aware of what are those things that are getting in your way and think about how you can take a step back and let others come forward. The other thing you have to do is anchor yourself. Make sure you have some good confidence, some good allies, some people who can be good supports for you. A confidant should be somebody who doesn't have conflicting loyalty. So that means that if you have dynamics happening in your workplace where there are different power plays, then it may well be useful for you to have a confidant outside the workplace who is going to be a good, objective person who can also support you. So anchoring yourself means that you are really going to do that, tapping into your own values, finding good supports in place, and doing some good personal reflection. And remembering that you are not just your role in your workplace. You have a much bigger life as well as that role. We've just been looking at adaptive leadership and also some of the metaphors of transformational leadership. If you keep that information in mind and also refer to the workbook and the series of articles that you have, those particular frameworks will be useful for you as we go into discussing Ralph Stacey's work on organisational change and dynamics. When you look at this slide, you see that there's a lot of circles, and quite often I have people say to me, that makes no sense whatsoever to me. So the good thing is you have an article to work with there. You also have some good questions to follow. But I'd really encourage you to take some notes as I go through this, because I've got one slide and you'll see there's different numbers and different circles on it. And interestingly enough, because this is about dynamics, the whole experience of organisational dynamics and change means that things are on the move. So let's start with the rational loop, which is right there in the middle. And this is about, you'll see number 1 there is discover. And the rational loop would be in any organisation when we start to do something and we make a decision to change or shift something, put something into place, we discover a few things. We discover what we might need to change. Then we might choose some options. That's number 2. Number 5 up there, which if you were just using the rational loop would be number 3. This means act, put something into place. Stacey would say that as you discover things and you find out what things you need to change and how you need to change them, and you start to choose, so you develop some options, the next thing you have to do is bring on board the people who are most affected by the change. So he calls them the vested interest groups. Those who are the vested interest groups are those people who are going to be impacted by the change. Now, if you think of any of your own situations, there may well be vested interest groups that also have a strong leadership role. There may also be those who are in leadership roles that impact on your decision making, that impact on the change, that will support it, that will go against it, and you have to bring all of those groups on board. So if you were thinking about this in a step-by-step process, one of the early things you do at the discovery stage is do some research and start to talk to people about what their ideas are, how things might be done differently. If you've got some outcomes that you're trying to achieve, a new direction that you're trying to create, at your discovery stage, you're already moving into chat with those people and bring them on board, especially those who are most impacted. And then you also keep those in leadership roles informed of how you're going and ask their views. So your plan would keep in mind everybody who's impacted, everybody who might have a say and a power base or even a political power base that is going to impact on what you're doing. And you can see that particular loop he's called the overt politics loop. So instead of just doing your general rational loop, a normal decision-making process and testing it out and gathering information, you're going to broaden that and specifically bring in the right groups and the right people. You might even do some interviews with people to gather data, run some focus groups. You might even use some different techniques like appreciative inquiry, World Cafe processes to gather information from people and get their ideas and bring them on board. Now, once you've gone through that, so you can see that you've discovered things, you've developed options, you've tested it out and gathered information from the vested interest groups and also the leadership groups. All the information that you get from those groups then impacts your options again. So you might make different choices. And then you finally implement it. You act and you put something in place. And you'll see on Stacey's model, he's got a loop called the covert politics loop. Now, the interesting thing is that no matter how much we consult with people, bring them on board, develop ownership with them, once you start putting a change in place, it immediately has a different experience than talking about it. So at the covert politics loop stage, you can always anticipate that as changes are implemented, you will get organisational defences occurring. You will have people maybe slowing a process down, maybe deciding that the budget that was put towards this is no longer available, questioning decisions that were made. Now, as soon as you get organisational defences occurring, you need to anticipate what sorts of things will come your way. If you're a person who's leading the change, then you have to anticipate who of the vested interest groups, who of the leadership and coalition people are going to be the ones that are going to embrace and move forward, and which ones are likely to maybe be questioning a bit longer, trying to see the value in it for them, because that's when organisational defences occur. So I remember being at I suppose it was a statewide change in a government department a number of years ago, and we discovered, after doing lots of consultation and lots of work with people, as the change occurred, a number of people said, well, I didn't expect this. This wasn't going to happen. We didn't agree to this. So there were unanticipated outcomes, which is fairly normal. So in any of your planning that you're doing, you have to think and be ready. So this is your flexible responsiveness. Be ready for those unanticipated events that are occurring and outcomes. You can see in the covert politics loop, the next spot there at point number 7 is fear of failure. So when the organisational defences occur and people respond negatively and they defend themselves, they might defend their patch, they might defend their budget, then people experience a sense of failure. Often those leading the change go, oh no, how am I going to do this? How will I engage people? I thought we'd gotten a long way down the track and now it's all going to fall over. If you know this, you can start to work with them. You can engage them again. And if you think about some of the models we've gone through, bring them to mind about how you're going to work with people. The next step would be to move over and have a look and discover once again what's happening and how is it going. The culture and cognition loop, this is really around dealing with changes in the culture of an organisation. You might be dealing with contradictions from the old and the new, and starting to tell the new stories of what will be in the future. And some of the processes we're going to cover in the 4th session will allow you to create those new stories. You've got a point there that says shared mental models. So this is creating the new direction and the new way of working and bringing people on board. However, if you somehow don't deal with the contradictions and the conflict at this stage, we find that organisations can go into what they call the unconscious process loop, and it's almost like the shadow side of an organisation. We find that people bunker down. They might start sabotaging what's going on. They might do much more covert actions behind the scenes. In one organisation, I know that when they bunkered down, stories were deliberately fed outside the organisation to come back in to destabilise the senior team. And this was done from some of the middle managers who felt very threatened. So we did work out fairly quickly that they hadn't been brought on board, and their way of looking after themselves was to bunker down and almost do everything they could to disrupt the change. So if you have a look at this model and you have a look at the worksheet that you have questions at each stage that you can really have a look at and see, where do I sit in this? Where is my organisation currently? Where have we been? You can review things, you can plan for the future. So it's an excellent tool, and you'll see also there's some linkages that have been provided to some of Ralph Stacey's work online as well.